fed them. I clothed them. I sat up through their fevers and drove them to school in the dark every single morning for 8 years. And then my son walked back through that door and told the police I had stolen them. I still think about the night my daughter-in-law left. It was raining so hard you couldn't see the end of the driveway. She knocked at my door, even though she'd been to my house 100 times. And when I opened it, she was standing there with 3 kids and 1 garbage bag between all of them. My grandson Eli was 4. My granddaughter June was 6. The baby, May, was 18 months and already asleep against her mother's shoulder. My daughter-in-law's name was Piper. She'd been with my son Donovan since they were 19 years old. I never disliked her. She was flighty, sure. Made poor choices, but she loved those kids in her way. I believe that. I have to believe it. She said she needed 1 week. Said Donovan had been arrested again, this time for distribution, not just possession, and that she had nowhere to go. Her own mother was in a facility in Tucson. Her sister wouldn't take the kids. She looked at me with those exhausted eyes and said, "Just until I get stable, Ray. 1 week." I told her to come inside out of the rain. That was 8 years before my son came back and had me arrested. I was 63 when Piper left the kids with me. I'd been retired 2 years from 31 years working for the county water authority. I had a pension, a paid-off house in Hendricks County, Indiana, and nothing particular to do with my days. My wife Carolyn had passed 4 years earlier from pancreatic cancer, and the house had been too quiet since. 3 kids tore through that quiet like a freight train, and I am not going to lie to you. The first month was the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. May wouldn't sleep. She cried for her mother every night, and I didn't know what to do except hold her and walk the hallway and tell her it was going to be all right, even when I wasn't sure it was. Eli stopped eating for almost a week. June, my June, who was so serious even at 6, would sit at the kitchen table after dinner and ask me when Mama was coming back, and I'd say, "Soon, baby, soon," because what else do you say to a 6-year-old? Piper called the first 3 weeks, then less, then not at all. I hired a family law attorney out of Indianapolis, a woman named Sandra, sharp as a tack, who told me my options clearly and without sugarcoating. She said the fastest route to stability for the kids was emergency guardianship, and that if Piper couldn't be located or was unfit, I could petition for full legal guardianship within 6 months. I didn't want to take anything from Piper permanently. I just needed the kids to be able to go to the doctor, to enroll in school, to exist legally in my house. The guardianship was granted without contest because Piper never showed up to contest it. The school in Danville knew us. The pediatrician at Hendricks Regional knew us. My neighbor across the street, a retired mail carrier named Otis, used to walk over with tomatoes from his garden in the summer and sit on the porch while the kids played in the yard. He watched Eli learn to ride a bike. He was at June's 5th grade play. He was the kind of neighbor you don't deserve, but somehow get lucky enough to have, and I don't know what I would have done without him some days. Donovan got out of federal prison after 4 years. I knew because Sandra monitored the case for me. I'd written him twice, early on, to let him know where the kids were and that they were safe. He never wrote back. When he was released, I braced myself. I thought he might show up. He didn't. Months went by. Then a year. Then 2. I started to relax. That was my mistake, maybe. You stop watching the horizon when nothing comes over it for long enough. By the time June turned 14, she was getting straight A's and talking about becoming a nurse. Eli was 11 and had found baseball. He practiced in the backyard every evening until it was too dark to see the ball. May, who had once cried every night for her mother, had become the funniest person in any room she walked into. She used to do impressions of the anchors on the local news that had me crying with laughter. I had built something. It wasn't what I'd planned for my retirement, but it was real, and it was good, and those children were mine in every way that mattered. The letter came on a Tuesday. It was from an attorney's office in Columbus, Ohio. The name on the letterhead was a man called Garrett Finch. The letter informed me that my son Donovan, the biological father of Eli, June, and May, was petitioning the court to terminate my guardianship and assume full parental custody of all 3 children. It also alleged, and this is the part that made me sit down at the kitchen table and read the paragraph 3 times, that I had, quote, improperly detained the minor children from their biological parent without consent and in violation of his parental rights. I called Sandra that afternoon. She was quiet for a moment after I read her the letter. Then she said, "Ray, this is not a small thing. We need to move fast." I asked her what fast meant. She said, "It means I need every document we have, every school record, every medical record, every court filing from the original guardianship. And I need to know, is there anything Donovan could use? Any gaps? Any times you couldn't account for the kids?" I told her no. I told her the records were complete. I had kept everything, every report card, every vaccination record, every permission slip. I put them in a fireproof box under the bed in the guest room, which tells you something about the kind of paranoid love you develop when you're raising someone else's children, and you always know, somewhere in the back of your mind, that the day might come. What I didn't know was that the letter was only the opening move. 3 weeks after the letter, a social worker showed up at my door. A young man, couldn't have been more than 25, with a clipboard and a lanyard from the Indiana Department of Child Services. He said he was conducting a welfare check on the children based on a complaint that had been filed. He was polite, professional. I let him in. He spoke to each of the kids separately. He toured the house. He looked in the refrigerator, which I found out later is standard. He was there for 2 hours. When he left, he shook my hand and said he had no concerns and would file accordingly. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. What I didn't find out until later, much later, when Sandra obtained the records, was that a second complaint had been filed the very next day, this time to a different caseworker in a different district, with a different set of allegations. Allegations that I had isolated the children from their father, that I had spoken negatively about Donovan in front of them, that I had refused to allow phone contact. All of it was false. I had tried to allow phone contact. I had given Donovan my number the first year. He never used it. Sandra filed a response to Finch's petition. She included the original guardianship order, the documentation of Piper's abandonment, the record showing Donovan's incarceration and complete absence, the school records, the medical records, letters from the kids' teachers and their pediatrician and their dentist. She submitted a statement from Otis, who had watched these children grow up from his porch across the street. The hearing was set for March. We had 11 weeks. In the 9th week, Otis came over one evening looking uncomfortable. He sat down at my kitchen table. The kids were upstairs doing homework, and he told me something that changed everything. He said a man had come to see him, a man he didn't recognize who said he was a paralegal from Finch's office who had offered Otis money. He said the number was $500 to sign a statement saying that I had kept the children from having contact with their father, that I had spoken badly about Donovan in front of them, that the home environment was, in the paralegal's words, emotionally restrictive. Otis said he told the man to get off his property. Then Otis reached into his jacket pocket and put a business card on my table. He'd taken it from the man before sending him away. He looked at me and said, "I figured you'd want to know who they sent." I called Sandra that night. She told me to keep the business card. She told me that if Finch's office was attempting to manufacture witness statements, that was potentially criminal. She said she wanted to subpoena Otis and have him testify to exactly what had happened. Then Sandra told me something else. She said she'd made some inquiries about Garrett Finch. He was licensed in Ohio, but had twice been sanctioned by the bar for procedural violations. She said that in her experience, attorneys like Finch typically worked on contingency for clients who had something to gain financially. And she asked me a question I hadn't expected. She asked whether Donovan stood to inherit anything. I thought about that for a long time after I hung up the phone. Carolyn had a life insurance policy. Old one, from before she got sick. It paid out $80,000 when she died, and I had put it in a savings account I hadn't touched. I had also updated my will after she passed, and I had divided everything, the house, the savings, whatever was left, equally among the 3 grandchildren. Not to Donovan. To the kids. Sandra called me back the next morning and said she'd spoken to a colleague who specialized in elder financial exploitation. The colleague said it wasn't uncommon for estranged biological parents to pursue custody in circumstances where grandparents had accumulated assets, especially when those assets were willed to minor children that the parent might then control. I sat with that for a long time. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed and listened to the house. Eli's fan running in his room. May talking in her sleep, which she'd done since she was a toddler. June's light still on under her door at 11 p.m. because she always stayed up too late reading. These were my people. Whatever happened in that courtroom tomorrow, these three had been mine for 8 years, and I had shown up for every single day of it. I got up at 4 in the morning and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and went through the fireproof box one more time. Report cards, immunization records, the original guardianship order, June's award from a science fair, Eli's teen photo from last summer's baseball league, May's last birthday card to me, written in her Luby handwriting. "You're the best, Grandpa. Don't ever stop making your chili." I put everything back in the box and drove to the courthouse at 7:30. Sandra met me outside. She looked calm, which helped. She told me Finch had filed a last-minute motion to exclude Otis's testimony on procedural grounds. She said the judge had already denied it. She said, "Let's go in." The hearing lasted most of the day. Donovan sat across the room in a collared shirt that looked like it had been bought for the occasion. He did not look at me. He looked at Finch whenever he needed direction, which was often. He had not seen his children in 8 years. When the judge asked him, directly, to explain his absence, his answer was that he had been incarcerated and that upon release he had needed time to stabilize before making contact. The judge asked him what stabilizing had looked like. Specifically, Donovan said he had obtained employment and housing. The judge asked when he had obtained them. There was a pause. Donovan said, 18 months ago. 18 months. He had been stable and housed and employed for 18 months and had made no contact and filed no communication until Finch sent that letter. Sandra did not ask a single unnecessary question. She put the documentation in front of the judge in order. She called Otis, who testified clearly and without drama about the man who had come to his door with $500 and a statement for him to sign. Finch objected repeatedly. The judge overruled him, repeatedly. Sandra called June, repeatedly. Sandra called June. June was 14. She walked to the stand in her school clothes, jeans and a green sweater, and she sat up straight the way she always did, and she answered every question in a voice that did not waver. The judge asked her if she wanted to live with her grandfather. She said yes. He asked her why. She said, "Because he's been there. He was there when my grandmother died, and I didn't understand what death was yet. He was there for every school thing. He never missed one. He knows how I take my coffee. He knows I'm scared of highways, but I'm working on it. He knows me." The judge looked at her for a moment. Then he thanked her, and she walked back to her seat and sat down next to the social worker who had accompanied her. The judge recessed for 40 minutes. When he came back, he denied Donovan's petition in full. He reinstated and reinforced the existing guardianship order. He noted in his ruling that the attempt to suborn witness testimony via financial inducement would be referred to the Indiana Bar for review of both Finch's conduct and the conduct of the individual who had approached Otis. Donovan stood up when the ruling was read. He said something to Finch. Finch put a hand on his arm. They walked out without looking at anyone. I sat in that courtroom for a while after everyone left. Sandra sat next to me and didn't say anything, which was exactly right. I drove home and pulled into the driveway and sat in the truck for a minute. Then I went inside. The kids were home from school. May had made popcorn. Eli was watching something on the TV with the volume too loud. June was at the kitchen table doing homework. Same as always. I stood in the doorway for a second. None of them knew how close it had been. May looked up and said, "Grandpa, why are you just standing there?" I said I was just glad to be home. She threw a piece of popcorn at me and told me to sit down. I looked over at Otis's house the next morning. His porch light was on, same as it always was. I walked across the street with a pan of the coffee cake I only make on special occasions and knocked on his door. When he opened it, I handed it to him and I said, "You saved us." He waved me off the way he always does when you try to thank him for anything. He said, "You would have won anyway." Maybe. I don't know, but that business card he took from the man at his door and the testimony he gave without hesitating, that was the weight that tipped it. I know it was. Donovan never contacted us again. I don't know where he is now, and I have stopped trying to know. I made my peace with my son a long time ago, or whatever version of peace is available when someone chooses to be absent and then shows up only when there's something to take. June is applying to nursing programs this fall. She's looking at schools in Indiana and one in Ohio she likes because of their clinical partnerships. She comes home on weekends when she can and still stays up too late reading. Eli made the varsity baseball team his freshman year of high school. He called me from the school parking lot right after he saw the list posted on the gym door. He was trying to sound cool about it. He wasn't. I could hear him grinning through the phone. May decided last year that she wants to study communications. She thinks she might want to do broadcast journalism, which tracks, given the news anchor impressions. She still talks in her sleep. My house is louder than I ever expected my retirement to be. The kitchen is always a mess. Someone is always out of shampoo. The electric bill is the thing I try not to think about. I would not change one single day of it.